With how few options there were coming into day one of NHL Free Agency, it's no surprise that we have seen some crazy contracts handed out. But amid all the craziness today, I wanted to rank some of the best and worst contracts that have been signed in free agency so far. With all the money being handed out, there's a few interesting ones here. So make sure you guys watch till the end as we talk about a bunch of the new deals for free agency. And hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this as we cover all the major moves this summer. But let's start out today with some positivity and start with one of the best contracts signed in free agency so far, with the Vancouver Canucks being able to keep Brock Boeser at 7 years, $7.25 million. I really think this deal is just fantastic for everybody involved. I just felt like for Brock, him leaving Vancouver just would have felt wrong. He's such a character there and such a big part of that locker room. And considering the goal scoring, how he can be when he is at his best, it just felt like it would have been a big loss for Vancouver for a team needing more offense next year. Now, this last season wasn't perfect by any means, but still got 25 goals, 50 points in 75 games. The big thing, of course, is the term. We heard a lot about how Vancouver wanted to keep it to around 5 years. They ultimately settled at 7. But around $7 million, I think is completely fair for a player like Brock, and I would have expected him to get around 8.5 if he hit the open market. Even though he might have done pretty well on a team like Edmonton if he were to sign there, I just think he's a great fit for the Canucks, and the contract itself, there's nothing really to complain about. Sure, the term might be a little bit iffy, but the AAV is low enough to where I don't think it's much of a problem. But then let's go on to one of the lesser deals of the day, let's put it lightly. Let's go on to the Boston Bruins signing Tanner Jeannot to a 5-year, $3.4 million contract. And hey, if they signed him to 5 years at $3.4 million total, I wouldn't have too much problem with it. But the AAV combined with the term is just kind of baffling. I didn't think Jeannot was going to get anything more than maybe 2.5 on the open market for a lesser term deal. But 5 years for Jeannot, he's just not exactly the player I think you need to rush to lock up. Generally, I'm not really a big fan of signing depth players to long-term contracts. Sure, if you like a guy, you can like a guy, but in a lot of cases, how much is Jeannot really going to boost his value anyways? He is what he is. He's a fourth-line player, big physicality, solid speed, and he's a pretty simple game on top of that. But you're not really getting a massive offensive producer here unless it's his rookie season where he got 41 points in 81 games. I don't see that type of player returning. So to me, the term especially is what gets me here because it's just very strange to me. Personally, I think he's much more of the LA, Tampa Bay type of player than what we saw in his rookie season in Nashville. Still an effective player, and again, in the bottom 6, I don't think he's a bad piece, but the term, the AAV, I guess it doesn't matter too much for Boston. I don't see them being a team that is going to be super competitive next year, but it's these type of deals that compound the cap situation to be a little bit more frustrating than it maybe should be. Even with the cap rising, mistakes like this will still be pretty glaring. Now let's go on to a deal that I actually like quite a bit here with the Utah Mammoth going after Brandon Tanev, and especially when we saw the Matias Maccelli trade, the writing was on the wall that I thought Utah would go after a bottom 6 left wing, try to make a little bit of a replacement position there, and even though I think Maccelli, I would have had him still as a rebound candidate for next year, I still would have tried to keep him. Brandon Tanev is an excellent bet, and especially for that Utah bottom 6, is the exact type of player I think they should be going after. And the contract is pretty reasonable, 3 years at $2.5 million. Sure, the term isn't amazing, but at the same time, I don't think Brandon Tanev is going to age too much. The energy that he has, the relentless play, it's just the mindset behind him that drives that energy, and that's not going away anytime soon. In his case, I just think it's kind of a better Tanner Jeannot type of contract where you're signing a more physical presence for that bottom 6, but in Utah's case, it's not for 5 years. It's also for $1 million less, which is insane to me because Brandon Tanev, with the skill set here, he's not a pure grinder by any means. He's not going to put up 40 points or anything. But I think in Tanev's case, the goal scoring there has been pretty consistent. 16 goals in 2023 for Seattle, then 7, then 9. I think he's something that just as a fourth line winger is basically perfect in that role. Won't be too much of a scorer, but I think unlike Jeannot, just brings a better defensive game, is a little bit more energetic in his speed, and just brings that intensity that I love to have on my bottom 6. And I look at that Utah forward group, and there's a pretty perfect place for him in that fourth line. I think he might end up playing more left wing than right wing, which is where daily faceoff ends up having him on the right side. But still, you look at the wingers, and he's not going to be playing top pair minutes, top 6, even top 9. But he's going to be playing on the fourth line, the penalty kill, bringing the energy, and that type of versatility is something I think Utah needed a little bit more of, a little bit more consistently in their bottom 6 last year that they now have. Now, unfortunately, we have to go to another bad one here, though, and this one was one of the biggest shocks to me. Not in terms of him getting, like, term or anything, but just the pure money going to him. Let's talk about Cody Ceci getting signed by the LA Kings. As you guys can see, $4.5 million is the AAV on a 4-year contract. My goodness, Ken Holland. I know you're trying to change the identity of that team, get them more defensive and everything, but Cody Ceci, 4 years, 4.5 million? And I get it, this right defensive crop is a little bit weak in this year's free agency, but I would have just kept Jordan Spence, or better yet, actually played him so they didn't have to request a trade. I mean, Cody Ceci isn't the oldest guy in the world, but 4 years, you're going to have Ceci way past his prime at this point. At 6'3", at 209 pounds, I know why I got him. The size, the slap shot can be decent at points, but my goodness, I just don't see the upside here. If you watched him at all, especially after like the first round for Dallas, just an absolute tire fire, especially once they got to a faster team like Edmonton, which LA is trying to beat. Ceci was a disaster. I don't think he's the worst defenseman in the NHL. I wouldn't label him as that, even though some people might, but I just don't think he's going to be even a third pairing level guy for LA. At the end of the day, that's what he'll be. He'll be behind Brandt Clark, Drew Doughty. I understand that, but why are you paying your third pair defenseman $4.5 million? I don't understand that. He's going to get lower minutes, and he might do a little bit better in those shelter minutes, which hasn't really happened in San Jose or even Dallas for the most part, but again, $4.5 million. I understand Ceci as a third pair option. I think he could be okay in that position, but it's just the contract at the end of the day that just baffles me. He did really nothing in this year's playoffs to warrant the type of contract he's getting. In the cases of a player like a Nate Schmidt, for example, who signed on to Utah, I can understand, I guess, because of how solid he was for Florida in the playoffs, how much he was able to rise up his game and get so much better when he got into those tough moments. In Cody Ceci, it was the exact opposite, and I just don't see this moving the needle whatsoever for LA. If anything, if they face Edmonton next year, that's the player Edmonton's targeting, and that's the player they're scoring a ton of goals against. And the sad thing is, I thought LA had a lot of space to work with this offseason, but even though the Corey Perry contract isn't bad, I guess it's a one-year deal. Forsberg's, I guess, fine at that range. Even Dumoulin, I think, is a better contract than Ceci and just a better player flat out, so I understand that, but Cody Ceci, man, you could be a little bit more creative than this. You know that, LA? Maybe there was a chance where Ken Holland was used as a secret agent by Edmonton to create the Kings team that is even easier to play against in the first round of the playoffs, and the Oilers have had a great time against Cody Ceci, so you might as well continue that. Now we move on to a good contract here, going from an overpaid one to a contract that I actually thought was going to be a lot higher by the end of the day, and that was the Vladislav Gavrikov contract, signing with the New York Rangers at 7 years, $7 million. And I'm not usually the biggest Gavrikov fan. I think he eats minutes pretty well. He has some decent offensive punch, though that's not really his game all that often. But I thought he was going to get at least $8 million, maybe as much as Ivan Provorov in his $8.5 million deal. But the Rangers getting him at $7 million, I think, is pretty responsible and pretty fair. Especially since the Rangers, right after announcing this contract, were trading Keandre Miller to the Canes. It was pretty obvious that Gavrikov was just the Keandre Miller replacement. And I think in Gavrikov's case, he's just kind of a more smarter version of him. So I don't really think it's too much of going to be a frustration point long term. I think Gavrikov just is pretty quiet in the minutes he plays and usually gets pretty decent results. For LA, he's fit exceptionally well into that system. This last year, 30 points, 5 goals in 82 games. I think in the Rangers case, it doesn't completely transform that defense. I still think there are holes to fill, but I like the addition, and I think he'll fit pretty well there. But again, the biggest thing, not even just the fit, even though I think it is good aside, $7 million is way less than I expected. I could have seen a Gavrikov getting upwards of $8.5 million. Again, Provorov's contract just looks worse by the day, in my opinion. But $7 million is great. I think that's about the range I would have paid him. Maybe slightly less, but I can't really complain too much, especially with the open market and how few options there were. To get him at a pretty decent pay cut, in my opinion, is a nice, tidy bit of business. Onto a contract that I'm just not quite sure about at this stage right now. We go on to the Seattle Kraken signing Ryan Lindgren at 4 years, $4.5 million AAV. Now, outside of this point, I don't think there's any contract that I would say is truly horrible, at least on the offset, but I gotta say, it's still quite a bit of term and money for a defenseman that I just don't think has really been able to prove himself past the injuries he's had these last couple of seasons. If this was 2 to 3 years ago, I would absolutely be adoring this contract for the Seattle Kraken. Kraken. He was somebody that, especially in those playoff runs for the Rangers, was just always steady, physical, dependable, and rarely made too many mistakes in the defensive minutes he played. And alongside Adam Fox was the perfect line mate for a defenseman like that. The problem is, over these last couple of seasons, the injuries have been quite abundant, and even when he has been healthy, it's just kind of had middling returns, especially this last year, the Rangers, where things just got off the rails with him. And in Colorado, he got traded there, I thought was okay at points, but again, didn't really rebound in the way that I thought he could have in a much different, more high-paced system. Going to Seattle, I think it's more of the Avs type of style, but at the end of the day, I don't think Lindgren is in a position where he's going to get back to that 2022 type of Lindgren player. And that's unfortunate. I hope he does. I hope there's the potential for that, but I just think he sustained too much wear and tear for that to be a possibility. So with that in mind, I think the term especially is a little bit iffy. Seattle has a lot of young defensemen coming up that I'd like to see get more of an opportunity than Lindgren, especially since Seattle already has the bruising physical defensemen of guys like Alexiak and players, of course, like Larson that have been really dependable for them in the past. So I think for Seattle, it's a gamble, and if he gets back to those prime Rangers years, I think the AAV looks pretty decent in all honesty, but I think it'll take a lot for that to happen, and I don't really have too much confidence in it. I get it from Seattle's perspective. They want to get harder to play against, but I just think Seattle's kind of in this weird middle of the road situation where they're not good enough to make the playoffs, not nearly bad enough to be in the basement of the NHL, and just kind of in no man's land. I think they really needed to add some real big punch to the forward group especially, and have really failed to do so. We'll see what happens. I think Lindgren isn't a net negative, but at that contract level, I just kind of feel uninspired. Let's go on to one of the most surprising contracts, I would say, of the day, with Jake Allen signing a 5-year term, $1.8 million AAV deal with the Devils. And this was a really interesting one because Jake Allen coming into today was pretty by far the best goaltending option in free agency this year. I don't think he was going to be a starter for anybody, but as a really perfect, consistent backup, he was about as good as you were going to get. But he signs long-term with New Jersey at an extremely reasonable cap hit. And I love this deal for the Devils, even though the term is a little bit iffy considering he'll be 35 this August, so he'll basically be 40 by the time this contract is over. Goaltenders, especially in Allen's case, that don't have the biggest workload in the world, tend to age pretty gracefully. And in Allen's case, he's 34 years old and still kicking pretty well this last year in 31 games and .908 save percentage. Even when he has to get tasked with more games, slightly more workload, he still handles it pretty solidly. So to have that type of guy behind Jacob Markstrom and to have this type of presence when players like Mikhail Yurgorov come up as goaltending prospects, I think it's just valuable to have. It's just surprising to me, though, that Allen would prioritize the term like he did. I guess he really wanted to stay in New Jersey because it seems to be a good fit because, man, I think he cost himself a lot of money. He would have gotten a lot more in the open market. I mean, we were hearing $4.5 million around that range for Allen in the open market, so quite a bit of a pay cut there to see it. But hey, I always love seeing players go out and just sign with the great situations they're in, and the Devils seem to be a great spot for him at $1.8 million. Sure, the term might be a little bit interesting, but who cares? Jake Allen's great. Now, this isn't a contract that I would say is absolutely horrible on the surface, but one I just kind of get confused about. Let's go on to my favorite team in the Dallas Stars, and them signing Rodic Foxa at 3 years, $2 million AAV. And here's the thing. I've liked Rodic Foxa for a long time as this really extremely solid defensive fourth line center, but I just don't understand from the Stars' perspective at all why they are doing this. I mean, I like Foxa. I'm sure he fits well in the room, so as a character, I understand that, but what's the improvement for this Stars team? I thought he was decent in the playoffs last year for St. Louis. Maybe that's what they're looking at right now, but not really much offense to glisten off whatsoever. He's just going to be playing those defensive minutes and doing it well. But for the Stars team, they were so extremely cap-strapped. They needed to have anything possible. They needed to trade Dumba and Lyubushkin to even have a chance at now being over the under the cap. And at this point now, it feels extremely unlikely that they're actually going to look for a right-handed defensive upgrade, which I understand in this market this summer, it is hard to come by, but I wouldn't have given up completely, which is what this Foxa deal feels like. The biggest problem to me, and the reason why I just don't understand this, though, is that the Stars had good options at this position. Sam Steele as a bottom six centerman has been perfect. Great defensive minutes and has come up in some big moments before. Oscar Beck as a younger fourth line center in the future, too, I think has also filled that role pretty well and also played in the playoffs. I didn't think looked out of place whatsoever. Also has pretty great defensive metrics. So I think in a lot of cases, Beck is just a cheaper and pretty similar impact to a player like Foxa. Neither are giving you much offense, but at the end of the day, it's a fourth line center. You're looking for defensive acumen. Foxa maybe is more experienced, but that's about it. So to give him term and $2 million in terms of the AAV for, again, a Stars team that is unbelievably cap strapped, I just don't quite understand it. If it were up to me, I just would have packaged Lyubushkin, Dumba as cap dumps, tried to find a righty option, and just have Sam Steele as the third line center if you wanted, and Oscar Beck as the fourth line center. It wouldn't have been ideal, but if you didn't want to have that, just have Matt Duchene as the third line center and have a line of like a Ben or a Borg. I mean, there's options there. I don't think you have to limit yourself in terms of that top six. So to me, especially, I think it limits the offense of this team and just the potential for any offseason targets they are to go after. Not the end of the world, but for a team like the Stars that is, again, so up to the cap right now, more than most teams out there in the league, it's just such a detriment, I think, to their cap situation. And again, the term at 3 years. I mean, a player like Oscar Beck, I think, could be pretty similar in especially a year or two. So, I don't know. Wait and see. Jim Nils proved me wrong before in free agency, but last year, he didn't with the Lyubushkin and Dumba contracts. I'm just saying. Now, going on to an older player that I think actually signed a really interesting contract, and that is James Van Riemsdyk heading to the Detroit Red Wings. Now, I didn't expect the Red Wings to be all too active in free agency this year, unless it was for like a Nick Perbix, who ultimately ended up going for the Nashville Predators. But I expected most of their activity to be through trades, which is what we saw, of course, in the John Gibson deal, and more to come, I think, down the line. But James Van Riemsdyk is a pretty underrated piece to me, and 1 year, $1 million, that is no risk whatsoever, and I think he fits pretty well for what the Red Wings are usually looking for. I was talking about it on the Bleacher Report live stream we did with Frank Saravelli, and he mentioned how much James Van Riemsdyk was able to come out of nowhere and surprise for Columbus, and that really was the case. I thought, especially in the last couple of months of the season, he actually started to perform quite well. Nothing exceptional or anything, but 16 goals, 36 points in 71 games, even though he has the defensive limits to his game. If you surround him with some good insulators, I think James Van Riemsdyk just as a natural scorer, something that gets into the space and is able to maximize his chances. There's gotten very few guys out there that can do it as efficiently as a JVR. Sure, he's pretty old still at 36 years old, but I think for the Red Wings bottom six, just having more options like JVR is, I think, a good example of what Detroit should be using a little bit more of when it comes to their cap space. Still, a lot more moves, I think, come for the Red Wings, mostly through trades, but a low-risk option, James Van Riemsdyk, I don't mind it one bit. Now, this wasn't a free agent edition, but one signing I did want to shout out was the Logan Stankoven extension with the Carolina Hurricanes. 8 years at $6 million, and I just absolutely adore this for the Canes. Stankoven, I think, already fit in pretty well for that Canes team, especially in the playoffs. As the playoffs got further down, he just got better and better. Finished with 8 points in 15 games and 5 goals. Solid as well in the Eastern Conference Finals. One of the only players producing for that Hurricanes roster. But I think in Stankoven's case, I think he's just your perfect second-line wing going forward. And at $6 million, that's better than the going rate going forward with how much the cap is rising, especially with players like Stankoven and how much they're getting at younger prices. I think Stankoven is just such a pro style player, and the energy he brings on top of the offense is pretty solid. And if he learns how to finish consistently, get that shot a little bit better, then my goodness, this is a steal. But those to me are some of the best and lesser contracts that we've seen signed so far in free agency. Let me know your thoughts down below on all the deals we talked about today, and out of everything that's been signed, what do you think is the best and the worst? Let us know. And of course, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, notification bell, and it should be with all the hockey fans you guys know online. On top of that, if you want to watch some more videos, you can click on this card for all of my hockey trade rumor content right in one playlist. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a fantastic free agency day, and goodbye.